Okay, Stefan, thank you so much for being with us today on the Newsmaker. A lot to talk about with you, and it was so interesting as I was preparing a topic that came up more than I expected, and I thought was a bit funny, was this issue with your hair. I mean, when you Google, Stefan Meierhans, it also says Frisur.
Yeah. I think that's a very good sign that we have come a step further in emancipation. About 10 or 15 years ago, when there was women in politics, most people talked about the length of their skirts or how they would dress. And now they're talking about a man's haircut, which I think is really a step further in the emancipation of people. That's very good, and I don't mind.
You don't mind, it doesn't detract from what you're doing.
As long as my wife likes my haircut, I'm not going to change it, and my work doesn't really depend on my haircut, so I don't really care.
Happy wife, happy life.
Exactly.
Even when it comes to hair. Now, of course, another reason that your name came up a lot recently in the news was because of the whole PostAuto scandal, and it looks like the resolution of this. Now, you were one of the first people to flag this in 2012. What was your impression at the time? Like, what made you say, wait, something is wrong here?
The starting point of our investigation at that period of time was that the ticket prices for train rides especially would go up. And then due to heavier tax load for the train companies when they use the infrastructure. Because we have a unified ticketing system in Switzerland, you only have to buy one ticket, and you don't have to go to different companies. You can buy a ticket which is valid for the whole journey. Then the question would come up: what happens to those who don't use railroads or rail tracks? They don't have a heavier tax load, so they basically should lower their prices. But we would find out that they wouldn't, even though they had less costs, and this triggered the whole investigation. And we just saw that they had two different balance sheets, one with 27 millions of benefit and the other one with 2.7, which they handed into the regulation authority, and that triggered some questions.
And at the time, did you feel like people were listening? Because it was 6 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it took a long time.
Well, I don't think, not really. I think, the biggest problem we have is a governance issue in all of public transportation, because usually the owner of the transportation company is the same entity that makes the regulations. Once in a while, you have at least the thought that making money with public transportation or any other utilities which are owned by the state is more important than making fair pricing for the customers. It's like a bit of hidden taxes, basically. And I had the impression that this interest was much heavier and much more important to those people who were supposed to look into such kind of questions.
So transparency was the issue. Is that what you mean?
Transparency and interests. As long as such companies are owned by the state, they have, and regulated, owned and regulated by the same entity, that's a conflict of interest, a systemic conflict of interest. You want to make more money, or you want to have a fair regulation. And those interests, they're not being resolved or being weighed always at the right amount of justice, basically.
Speaking of other sectors, and specifically perhaps SBB, I mean, I assume Bob Meyer is not, of SBB is not a fan of what you're doing, because you have to keep an eye on him, huh? And on what SBB is.
Part of my job and my job description is to make new enemies every day. Because, of course, whenever I surface, people don't have outbursts of joy because they know I'm going to take away something from them. So usually the first reaction I meet when I meet some company or some monopoly especially, then they usually are more at the defensive side and want to protect their earnings and their business. So that's part of the job.
The price watchdog.
Exactly, price watchdog.
As they call you. I want to get back to that, but just to finish up with the PostAuto, are you worried that this could be the case for other sectors in the Confederation? That this could be happening in other places? Are you now looking specifically at other sectors?
I am worried because as long as the system is built the way it is built now, we always have those conflict of interest. And systemically, as the system is built that way, it leads to confusion, it leads to responsibility and reliability, which are mixed up in different roles. And I think we should really go and fix problems where they are. And that's why I still am a bit worried that we might see surfacing other problems which could be similar to PostAuto's case. But on the other hand, I'm very confident, and I mean, we have the proof now. It took a long time to find out what really happened and to bring it to daylight, but eventually it happened, and thus I'm very confident in our authorities that they finally, sometimes it takes a bit longer, everything takes a bit longer in Switzerland, but that finally the problems can be solved, found and solved.
So you feel like you count that as a success for you?
Not for me.
No,
well, we did the right move at the right period of time, but it's also a bit of a slump. I mean, there are so many things you could look at, and you look at, and 99% of times you don't find anything suspicious, and then once in a while you find something. So I wouldn't say that it's a success, because also eventually it's another regulation authority who really discovered the whole size of the problem, and I think they would merit much more applause for what they did eventually. We initiated the investigation, but somebody else finished the job, and I think they merit an applause for that.
Now let's go back to your job as the price watchdog and the guy who is out to make Switzerland less expensive.
I'm trying to make it less expensive, and I don't succeed all the time. And you know from your own experience, and I know it as well when I go shopping. I think one of the biggest problems we have, and biggest challenge, is also that we don't have enough competition, and the level of competition is, compared to other countries, very low, because we're a small market. Switzerland is not a member of the European Union, is not part of the single market, and this already limits competition. Importing things is not as easy as it is between France and Germany, or between Denmark and Spain, for example. And that makes it much more easy for sellers to ask a higher price. And I think systemically we have to work on this, cut down barriers, cut down frontiers, facilitate imports, and open the market to more competition. The first thing in the morning when I arrive here in Bern in my office, there is a stack of letters or emails which arrive, and the first thing I do is I read through, and then we have a meeting afterwards, and we decide which case are we going to follow up on, to which extent. There are simple cases. I can give you an example. I remember somebody who argued that the sandwich of their bakery would increase from 4 francs 50 to 6 francs, and that I should do something about the price of the sandwich in central Switzerland. So I looked up in the phone book, and I found 6 other bakeries and 4 other grocery stores in the same village. So what we did, and what I did, I wrote a letter to this person, and as an attachment, I put the list of the bakeries and the grocery shops.
The options that they have.
The options. I said, you have your own responsibility as a consumer. If you're not happy with the 6 franc sandwich at this bakery, you have to check out yourself. You can't delegate all the responsibility you have to some clerk in Bern. So I think it's also important to create more transparency and help people help themselves by giving them the information they need in order to take a wise decision when they shop or when they purchase goods or services.
Now, you've been 10 years in the office now. If you take stock, what has this met your expectations when you first started? Do you feel like you have arrived somehow?
I think, let me again talk about public transportation. When I arrived, it's one of my key customers basically.
Yeah.
When I arrived and I started discussing with them and arguing with them, they would say that that was silly talk and they wouldn't take seriously what I said. Now that things and times have really changed radically, in that respect, that even the CEO of SBB now says that we have to cut the prices, come down on pricing. So I think there has been a change of culture and a change of understanding what the responsibility, especially of stately owned companies, is towards customers. And when I started, this was not the case. Now I think I might have contributed to this culture change a little bit through all those discussions I had with responsible people. In this respect, it has met my expectations, but of course there is many problems which haven't been solved. I especially think about the health sector, where we really have big challenges ahead.
Yeah. What are those challenges for you at the moment?
Every year, health insurance in Switzerland goes up on the average about between 4 and 5%. Since 1996, the costs in healthcare have doubled. Our salaries have only risen by 20% and our gross domestic product by 50%. That means that the health insurance costs have risen 5 times as fast as our salaries, and double twice the pace of the development of our economy.
I hear those numbers and it makes me nervous. I just want to know what you're doing about it.
We are doing a lot of things. We have, for example, saved many millions or at least even billions on drug pricing in Switzerland. Has come down by 3-4 digit million numbers. Also, hospital tariffs have come down. The average base rate, has come down from more than 10,000 francs per case to 9,500 francs, which is equals about $500 million a year recurring savings. But the biggest problem in healthcare is, on the one hand, is pricing, but on the other hand, and that's where I find my limits, is the number, the quantity of services and goods being used. And that's a problem which, through prices, I can't handle. When the quantity of services consumed is going up and up and up, I can lower the price as much as I want to. It's being compensated by more quantity, more operations, more usage of drugs, more consultations with doctors, and that's the problem. I think that's the biggest challenge, that we have a much higher quantity of services and goods in the healthcare business that are being consumed. And that's the responsibility of every single one of us, basically.
What about organic food? Is the solution for that problem is more at hand, or is it also something that needs to go in a more legal, political direction?
Do you know, food and groceries in Switzerland is a particular problem, and basically the high pricing in Switzerland is due to our agricultural policy. We have, in the constitution even, it says that we have to make sure that we are autark, nourishing ourselves, basically, to a certain extent. And that means that we have many trade barriers, import barriers. When you want to import groceries, also organic groceries from abroad, there is many high tax duties you have to pay.
Yes.
I
mean, as a consumer, I feel that, yeah.
Yeah, and it really is very expensive. But the Swiss people have confirmed this policy just about a year ago in a popular referendum. So this is a political decision by the majority of the Swiss people who vote. And I have to follow this this opinion since it even is written in the Constitution. So I don't have very much marge de manœuvre,
Yes.
very many possibilities. I think there is some systemic changes also in the agricultural field that could be taken in order to increase competition. And I mean, the sad result of the policy we see now is that many people go abroad and do their shopping, be it now organic or non-organic, on the other side of the border, because there is rarely any spots in Switzerland where you can't reach the border within 1.5 hours. So people just go abroad.
But the discrepancy is sometimes huge. You know, you pay for a tomato, you pay, you know, twice, 2 or 3 times the price of what you would pay in Switzerland.
At least you can, you make many happy farmers in Switzerland. So if this makes you happy.
And on that note, I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, we live in a liberal country where every company should be able to decide prices for themselves of their products. So why would we need a person like you?
Well, you know, there is, and as I said, I'm very liberal, and I think market economy is the answer to many problems, and it has shown in the past 200 years that as a system it works very well. But there is situations where you don't have a working competition. We have monopolies, and there are people who are basically imprisoned customers. They don't have a choice. So there they need a protection, and that's why I give them this protection, and that's why we have it written in the Constitution that we have this price supervision in Switzerland in order to protect consumers when there is not effective competition. I think the best price watchdog is a really effective competition, but when there is not effective competition, you have to help and you have to protect the consumers who could be abused in their imprisoned situation, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Earlier you told me, just to finish up, that you spent some time in the US. And you actually wrote, I love this, you were in North Carolina, in Raleigh, as a student?
As a student, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you wrote a column about being a Swiss in the US. Mm-hmm. And you got good reviews.
It was
People
really
were
funny.
Open.
Yeah, it was a small community newspaper we're closer to Rocky Mount and to Raleigh, but in North Carolina. And I came there, that was before basic training in military service in Switzerland, half a year, went to community college. And it was really a culture shock. I guess the same culture shock that Americans might get when they come to the Swiss countryside. As for, I remember, for example, like how you shop, opening hours, very liberal. You could shop almost all the time. I had to buy a car, my first car at the age of 18, incredible in Switzerland. But there, that was really a very interesting experience. There are also, in this part of the States, religion plays a very important life, and much more than here. We're more in a secular society. There, religion, the countryside, that was, everybody met at church. Whereas here in Switzerland, nobody goes to church anymore. That was interesting.
Yeah, that's a big change. Mm-hmm. And speaking of the U.S., you know, I always think I know you have a staff of like, I don't know, 17 or 18 people underneath you, but then if you think of what the Federal Trade Commission is in the U.S., it's like gigantic. But it kind of makes sense, right?
Of course, I mean, the market's much bigger. But there is also, like utilities, they're also regulated in the U.S., for example, the pricing of utilities. So you have similar competencies. Perhaps you don't call it in the US price watchdog, but some kind of authority. But in almost every country in the world, you have a regulation of monopolies or semi-monopolies, and thus Switzerland is not really so much an exception compared to other countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they just like to highlight that it's only you and Italy, I think.
Yes.
I've read that have like this specific position.
Yes, that's correct.
So you're just one of two. Okay, and now really to finish up, you are a father. You have 2 daughters. How do you make it work? How do you balance a demanding job as yours is with also raising your family?
It always is a challenge, when you have especially special occasions, when school wants you to participate, it's a question of organization. And Also organizing with my wife, with the rest of the family who luckily supports us with Kreshi, where they go to day school. But there is much organization, but it's feasible. And for me, it's important that my people, that my children know who I am, and not only from the newspaper, but in real life. And I strive every day to give them that time they need and they deserve.
And you work from home, or?
Also, yeah. Usually when they go to bed and I open up my computer at 9:30, and then you work until you go to bed. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be flexible when you have kids, you know.
Yeah. I guess it's the same for you.
Yes, it is the same for me. It's like you turn it on and you turn it off whenever, up and down.
Yeah.
You still have to show up at the office most of the time. But,
Yeah.
but just to finish up, don't go away, don't go away. Got one more thing. I always like
Hat?
to pull a question out of the hat.
Okay. Does it matter which one I take?
No, it doesn't. It is always just a question of...
Do you ever yearn for your life before Facebook?
Yes,
I don't
before
understand
social
the
media.
question.
Are you in social media? Are you a social media person?
Yes, I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, but only on a personal account. I don't do job-related stuff on those accounts, because I think nowadays it's just part of life, and you want to connect. We have friends all over the world, in Australia, in the US, in England, in many other countries. And it's a very easy and good way to keep contact with them, and also to share with other friends and family also in Switzerland. That's why I think it's important.